Well, today I'm joined on the show by Steph Andrews, who is a worship leader, songwriter, and author. We're going to be talking about idolatry and the difference in the stage and the secret place, and why that's an important distinction for worship leaders to make. Before we get there, though, I want to tell you about a brand new resource from Worship Leader Coaching. It's a new book called House Music Prompts for the Worship Songwriter. If you've ever struggled to write songs for your church, if you've ever wanted to write but don't know where to start, or want someone to write with but you don't know where to find that person, I've been there. And that's why I wrote this book. House music contains over 100 prompts for the worship songwriter, over 100 starting points. It's like having a co-writer with you 24/7. Writing through this book, you'll be asked questions to spark your imagination. You'll be given words and phrases to explore. You'll take a deep dive into specific scriptures. You'll share your own story of redemption and even write from the perspective of God. If you want to get rid of that, I don't know where to start feeling forever, then house music is for you. It releases on February 23rd. Digital copies are available for pre order now. You can find the link to that in any of our social media bios or just search house music prompts for the worship songwriter rather, on Amazon. Physical copies will be available for order on the 23rd. Listen, if you do choose to pre-order, forward your receipt to Caleb at worshipleader.me. That's Caleb with a C, Caleb at worshipleader.me, and I'll go ahead and send you some prompts so that you can start writing immediately. I'll also send you two recent conversations I had with worship songwriters. You don't want to miss out on those. Y'all, I can't wait to get this book into your hands, and I can't wait to hear your songs. For now, let's get to my interview with Steph Andrews. Well, y'all, I'm here with Steph Andrews today. Really excited about our conversation about idolatry, which is a weird thing to get excited about, but it's going to be a good conversation. Steph, how you doing?
I am great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. So good to have you on. Before we dive in, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself and your ministry, what you're doing right now?
Yes, I am primarily a worship leader. I have been leading worship for almost a decade now,
Wow.
across the country in different churches. Most recently, I was at Church of the City, New York,
Okay.
in New York City. Um, my husband and I made the hard decision to leave New York City due to the pandemic. And we were kind of in a period of not knowing what was next. But we both are now on staff at Northway Christian Community in Pittsburgh, PA,
Very
which
cool.
we're really excited about. This is the church where I met the Lord for the first time,
Wow.
accepted Christ, was baptized, met my husband. So it's really been like a homecoming for us
Yeah.
to now find ourselves back in Pittsburgh. So we've been here now for about a month and a half.
Wow. Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome, man. Yeah, definitely a hard change and a weird time to go into a new church.
Yeah.
Luckily, you guys have history there, so that's
For
that's
sure.
cool. That's cool. Well, let's go ahead and dive into
Yeah.
today's topic. Let's start with, why is idolatry an important topic for worship leaders to consider?
Man, I feel like as worship leaders, we have this privilege every Sunday, every event that we're leading worship for, to lead people into the presence of God. And
Yeah,
that really is an honor and a privilege.
yeah.
And in order to do that, we need to have a right view of God.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of like my personal belief of what our mission is as followers of Christ is to become more and more like Jesus. So earth becomes more and more like heaven.
Yeah,
So if we have all of these idols in the way, that's going to filter into how we are leading people in worship. We're
yeah.
not going to be leading people from, this pure, unfiltered revelation of who God is and who we are as his children. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in scripture, when we're talking about idols, oftentimes we're talking about things that were literally, but like literal idols that were built out of gold or
Yeah,
whatever. Um, we don't do as much of that these days, but there are,
probably not.
right. But there are some, certainly some idols, specifically for worship leaders or ministry leaders. Talk about some of those. What are some idols that you see jumping up for worship leaders?
Man, I think fear of man or people pleasing.
Mm,
That could be like literally wanting the people in our team to like us,
yeah,
wanting the congregation to really like us,
yeah,
or our pastor, our boss, whoever that might be. I think that plays into it a lot.
yeah.
There's also like this weird double-sided spectrum of like pride on one
Right,
end,
right.
and then this like false humility on the other end,
Yeah,
where we are like constantly beating ourselves up, but almost because we're like fishing for compliments
yeah,
and
yeah.
attention. Um, Another one that's really huge, I think, especially right now, as we're like scrambling to like reinvent what we're doing in the midst of this pandemic, is the idol of busyness.
Mm,
Like, man, my calendar is so packed. Look at all these things
mhm,
I'm doing.
mhm,
And that ultimately ties into the platform,
mhm, mhm.
which I think is one of the biggest things that we wrestle with,
Yeah,
because so much of our job is literally being in a place where we are seen.
yeah,
Like we're standing on a stage, we're leading people in worship, which means that people are looking at us.
yeah,
And if we don't have a proper view of why we're up there, it can feel really great, right?
yeah,
To have all
yeah.
these people looking at you. We're like building our brand on
Right.
Instagram. We're trying to increase the numbers in our church. We're like writing all these songs.
Yeah.
Um, and if we aren't like looking at the true motivations of our heart, all of these things that are beautiful, like
Mhm,
writing songs is
mhm,
beautiful,
mhm, mhm,
and I think really important and biblical.
mhm.
Um, but if we aren't doing it out of the right motivation, this beautiful thing that should point people to God and point people to their identity as his children just becomes this like worthless idol that's like
Yeah,
all about promoting ourselves.
yeah, yeah. So how can we, like, how do you strike a balance? I mean, because there is an aspect of, like you said, there's an aspect of the job, you're in front of people, and then there's obviously nothing wrong with writing songs for your church, and there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong really with, if you're putting out songs or whatever, there's nothing wrong with building a
Hmm.
brand, right? There's nothing wrong with all these little things, but it's, how do you keep those things from consuming you?
Yeah. That definitely is a balance because like you said, there's nothing wrong with those things.
Mhm.
We want to do those things with excellence. We want to
Right.
honor the Lord with the talents and the abilities he's given us.
Mhm.
Um what I have found is the more I am in a place where I am being seen, the more I need to be in a place of solitude
Mhm.
and rest.
Mhm.
And, like people call it like the secret place,
Yeah.
or, I have some people I work with right now on my team who call it their like chair time. Like they
Mm.
have this designated chair
Yeah.
that's like, this is where I sit and I just like spend time with the Lord.
Yeah.
I think that balance of, um, the more I am seen, the more I'm tempted to be like, look at me and how awesome I am, how great this is, how I am like leading people, how much they
Mhm.
love it. Um, we need to like combat that with
Yeah.
more and more time
Yeah.
alone with the Lord. And we see Jesus doing this
Mhm.
all the
Mhm.
time in the Bible.
Mhm.
And it's often either before or right after miracles, or he gives the Sermon on the Mount and he's being seen by like crowds and crowds of people, and then, okay, now I'm going to go and I'm going to be alone with my Father because
Yeah.
I need to be filled once again with revelation of who he is
Yeah.
and who I am as his child. Um, yeah, because then it just becomes like, it can be really easy because our services or our worship nights can be such a like intense environment where
Mhm.
it feels like, wow, the Lord is like so present and
Mhm.
there's like so much energy in the room that it feels like we crave that time more because it's like, wow, I can tangibly see people reacting
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
being in God's presence, and we can like crave that environment more.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when we are getting like affirmation and it's like, wow, this is so great. And of course, like as creatives and musicians, it's like we love playing music, we
Right.
love like using those gifts. But I mean, man, I think as I get older too, now I sound like I'm ancient, but
Right. Right. Right.
um and now I have the noise of my like tiny children running around. Like
Right.
the more I just like love those moments of stillness where it's
Mhm.
like no one is watching me,
Mhm.
no one is, I don't have to perform for anyone, I don't need to like meet a certain level of expectation. Like it's
Mhm.
literally just me having a conversation with my father.
Mhm.
I've just like grown to love that more and more and need that more
Yeah.
and more.
Yeah. Talk about some of the differences between the stage and the secret place as far as like worship goes, or kind of what you're doing, because obviously there's the major difference is on a stage you're leading people, right? And by
Mhm.
yourself you don't have to do that. But talk about some of those differences and how maybe how that's impacted you personally or how it fills you.
Yeah. I mean, I used to look at my time of meeting with God as this like business meeting.
Mm.
Like I would come into my like morning meeting with a list of things that I wanted to talk to God about. And it was like, here's our agenda. I need an answer on X, Y, and Z. And I was really frustrated for a long time because it felt like God was really silent because he wasn't like immediately answering these things. And then over the past like year or so, I've been really trying to work through that, figure that out. And I realized like what makes our faith so different is this relational component with
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
That it's not about what we're like constantly bringing to him and having to give to him. So then it just became like, I think of how much I love my husband or how much I love my children, and recognizing that my relationship with God should be even deeper and
Hmm.
more intimate and more connected than those relationships. Then it just became about, man, I can't wait to be alone in your presence right now because I want to hear like what you have to say.
Yeah.
And the secret place, when we get to this point where we don't come in with these expectations and we don't come in with, um, this pressure of when I meet with God today, like I
Hmm.
really need you to give me a word because whatever you say, I need to like tell someone
Hmm.
at my rehearsal tonight.
Hmm.
And then it's like this heavy expectation that we come into that place with. Um, when we are able to view meeting with God, that alone time, devotional time, secret place, however you want to refer to it, it can just be so freeing to be in a space where all we're doing is experiencing like the pure presence of God.
Yeah.
And we are just receiving love and like affection and blessing because
Hmm.
I do believe that as his children, God the Father like just wants to like speak blessing and speak life
Hmm.
over
Hmm.
us. Um, I mean, to me, that is like the biggest difference between the secret place and the platform because
Yeah.
even as someone who has been leading worship now, you know, for a decade, has done that like most of that time as a full-time paid staff person.
Hmm.
Um, there are still moments where I'm like, am I doing a good job? Like, am I
Yeah.
reading the room correctly? Is this the
Yeah.
right song? People aren't into this. Why aren't they into it? Let me like, pull out X, Y, and Z to try to re-engage them. Oh my goodness, that player isn't like playing the right lead line. Like my tracks rig got messed up and now
Yeah.
Ableton is firing like two different songs at once.
Right.
There isn't like any of that distraction or that pressure in the secret place.
Yeah. Yeah. What happens to leaders who don't spend enough time there?
I think it becomes a lot easier for all of those competing voices to creep in.
Yeah.
Even the most confident worship leader, I think it's so easy to start listening to, that those lies of like, you need to be doing more, there's not enough on your plate right now. Like you should really be like leading people more and leading people more, or, um, oh man, like don't say that because you already said that during a worship set like 2 weeks
Right.
ago.
Right.
And you need to have like a fresh revelation like right
Right.
now, or people are going
Right.
to be like, this girl like doesn't know how to
Right.
lead. Um, and I'm trying to think of like what to compare it to, but I feel like there are certain things that God has said to me, like in those moments when it's like just me and him, that continue to fuel me. Like there are things that God said at the beginning of the pandemic that now, like almost a year later, I can like still look back to, and it's still energizing and it's
Yeah.
still empowering. But we as like earthly humans, like yes, we can like exhort each other and we can like affirm each other with the best intentions, but it's almost like when we are thriving off of whatever energy we get from the platform, we need like a bigger and bigger like high or like
Mhm.
adrenaline rush like every time,
Mhm.
or we're like convinced like wow, worship wasn't good enough today, people didn't experience God's presence. Like when we don't have that frequent reassurance from God in the secret place where it's like literally just being filled with his truth and who he is, we are relying on human beings to tell us our worth.
Right.
And it's just, someone could tell me, wow, your voice was like really powerful during that song. But then next week, I need to like be even greater.
Mhm.
Or, if one week I have this spontaneous chorus that happens.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, next week, if I don't have a spontaneous chorus, like, am I even being spirit led right now? Like,
Right.
when I am relying on the platform to instill me with purpose and
Mhm.
affirm my identity, like, it's just, it can be so like fleeting, and it's not as
Mhm.
sustaining as like I said, like, I can still think about, like, man, that, like, one moment when I was alone with the Lord for, like, maybe 5 minutes in
Mhm.
between putting my daughter down for a nap and then, like, starting laundry.
Yeah.
That time, what he spoke in that time is just like, you cannot replace his presence with
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah.
We can listen to a million podcasts, we can read all these books, but, like, nothing is going to replace that time in his
Right.
presence.
Yeah. And isn't it funny how many things we use to try to measure worship, which can't be
Oh, yeah.
measured for one.
No.
It's ascribing worth to God. It's telling Jesus why you love him, but we pick out all these things, you know, whether the band did a good job or whether we hit that note or we're able to land that spontaneous thing,
Yeah.
and all of those things are good and fine, but none
Mhm.
of them are worship. Well, worship is just ascribing worth. It's telling Jesus you love him. And so, yeah, man, that's something that I think a lot of worship leaders need to hear. I need to hear from time to time. Always a good reminder. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Talk
Uh,
about how worship leaders can not only protect themselves from,
Mhm.
idol worship and, uh, being too focused on the stage and their identity there, but also,
Mhm.
their team. How can they encourage their teams to do the same thing? And beyond that, their churches. We talk all the time here at Worship Leader Coaching about how, worship leading is a pastoral role. It's a pastoral, you're pastoring your team, you're pastoring your church. So the things that are, good for you, probably going to be good for them too, right? So can you speak to
Yeah.
that at all?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, like you said, like there is that pastoring element. I
Mhm,
think about Jesus, and so much of how he did ministry was just by literally setting the example.
mhm.
And I know, like, on our staff team, we've kind of set this accountability bar where, like, we will talk about like your chair time. Like,
Sure.
hey, like how's your chair time going? Like,
Mhm,
are you finding that time right now?
mhm,
Um I think we talk so much about excellence, and I don't think we talk enough about rest. And I think
mm,
part of that rest is that quiet time with the Lord.
mhm,
Um, I know some church staff, like I know when we were at National Community Church in
mhm,
Washington, D.C., like the first hour of our work week
mhm,
was staff prayer time.
mhm.
So it's like setting it on the calendar of like, this is intentional
Yeah,
time where like I've built it into my schedule. I have nothing else that's more important right now
yeah,
than meeting with God.
yeah.
Um, I think that's huge because there are so many things competing with our attention. I think if we as the leaders are setting the example of, hey, I'm letting you know Tuesday mornings, like this is my intentional, like larger block of time that I have
Mhm.
set aside for just being in God's presence, being in prayer, listening to Him.
Yep.
Um, I think that like opens the door for a conversation with our volunteers, with the other people that we minister with to do the same, to,
Yeah.
be accountable to having that time. Another thing that has been really powerful for me is when people, exhort something or call something out in me that is not tied to what I do on the platform.
Mm.
Um, for example, I am not the best listener. It is something that I have been working on for a really long time, and it's like I guess I just assume that I know what you're about to say, so I'll like
Sure.
cut people off. Um, but I had someone a few weeks ago even mention that, like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I feel like you really hear me when I talk to you.
Wow.
And I've really seen growth in that area. Um, that has been really big for me because
Yeah.
it shows people like you are noticing their development and has
Mhm.
nothing to do with what they're doing on the
Right.
platform. It's all about like who they're becoming.
Right.
And
Not just their role.
ultimately, yeah, like
Yeah.
that is them becoming more like who Jesus is. So that has been really big. Um, I mean, honestly, like a big thing is just that revelation and the honoring rest. And the more I read a lot of the Old Testament, actually, the
Mhm.
more I'm like, wow, there are 7 feasts mentioned in the book of Leviticus. And I think
Mhm.
all but one of them involve rest.
Mhm.
Like one of them is like, and then they rested for a year. I'm like,
Right.
a year. I'm
Right.
like trying to get 12 hours in where I'm like, I didn't
Right.
work at all. I didn't think about it. I just spent time with you, Lord. And he's like, you checked your email 3 times. Like,
Right,
we'll
right.
try. Like,
That was
um,
a good shot though. Yeah.
yeah, you tried.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, having those boundaries where it's like viewing that time away, it doesn't look as like impressive, I think,
Right.
on our calendars or our resumes. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, today I prayed for an hour and a half or
Right.
whatever. It
Right.
just, you know, it becomes really easy for us to be
Right.
like, this isn't as important, or I'm just gonna like do a like 15-minute devotional and I'm gonna like read my Bible and it's fine.
Yeah.
Instead of like, I need to hear what
Right.
God needs to tell me
Yeah.
today. Um, yeah.
Yeah. It's good. Well, let's change gears a little bit. You've been leading worship for about a decade in multiple cities around the
Yeah.
country, multiple churches. What's your best piece of advice for a new worship leader?
I mean, I think a lot of what we've already been talking about is
Hmm.
so huge.
Yeah.
Like literally nothing can replace God's presence.
Yeah.
I know even like me right now, I've been in this new role for a little over a month,
Hmm.
and it's like a new role, but I'm coming back to a place that is familiar to me.
Right.
Um, you jump into something and you want to do it well. So you want to like learn all these things, like how do they do this? How do they, what's the process for
Hmm.
this? And it becomes really easy to just be like, I'm going to start this new role. I want to do it as well as I can with so much excellence. So here are like the 20 things that I want to like accomplish in my
Right.
first 100 days or whatever. And
Right.
it becomes like, you're like halfway through your day and it's like a quick check-in of like, hey God, how are we doing today? Okay, we're great. All right, let
Yeah.
me just like continue on with my work.
Right.
Um, but if we can like set these boundaries at the beginning and
Hmm.
not have to like kind of how I am now backtrack and realize, wow, I um it's Friday now.
Hmm.
Today is supposed to be a day off, and I'm looking back at the week and realizing like, man, how much time did I actually spend doing nothing but just being with God?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
honestly think this is like the most important thing, like having
Hmm.
that boundary of like, I need this alone time, I need
Yeah.
this prayer time,
Yeah.
because ultimately, like, we cannot lead people from an empty cup. Like, our
Hmm.
cup should be overflowing. We should be so filled up when we walk into a service of, you know, the time that I've spent with God has overfilled me so much that I am like brimming with revelation of his goodness, of his faithfulness, of his love, that I can now like pour it out on the
Yeah.
people I'm leading and
Yeah.
still feel like I'm full.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, definitely great advice for new leaders. Absolutely. For old leaders, anybody. That's awesome. Well, hey, before we go, Steph just released, or by the time you guys hear this, yes, Steph
Yeah.
just released a brand new book called, I'm afraid I'm going to mix it up, but I love you. I see you. Be careful.
That's correct.
I love
Yeah.
you. I see you. Be careful.
Yeah.
Steph, tell us about the book and where we can find it and all that good stuff.
Yes. So those three sentences, I love you,
Mhm.
I see you, be careful, are the three things that I speak over my children the most.
Mm.
And this book really captures me like reconnecting with the heart of the Father and like unpacking and rediscovering true identity as his children.
Mm.
It's looking at how God speaks to his children and realizing that he does say similar things. We see his love manifested all over the Bible.
Yeah.
We see him saying, like, I see you, his physical presence. It's in the Old Testament, like
Mhm.
guiding the Israelites
Mhm.
in the temple. And then, of course, in the person of Jesus coming to earth. And then
Mhm.
now his Holy Spirit filling
Yeah.
each and every one of us. But that final part is really like where I find myself right now in this journey. Like,
Mm.
I've built this foundation on God's love.
Mhm.
I've come to understand the power of his presence and
Mhm.
how it works through me, what his presence is capable of doing. But now I'm finding myself in this tension where I still live with this like careful mindset
Mm.
rather than stepping into God's command, which is to be strong and courageous.
Right.
So that final section of the book really unpacks these like obstacles or barriers that I think are still present. And one of
Mm.
them, like being idolatry, living
Yeah.
with this like earthly mindset instead of a heavenly mindset.
Yeah.
These things that prevent us from walking out our like purpose and our calling as his children.
Wow.
So now when people will hear this, it will be
Yes.
available on Amazon in
Okay.
paperback, Kindle, hoping to eventually do an audiobook
Yeah.
format because I know for me, like now as a parent, it's like
Yeah.
that's just a lot easier.
Yeah. So much easier.
Yeah. And I'm starting to like blog about it more and whatnot
Sure.
on my personal website, which is
Okay.
just stephandrews.com.
Gotcha.
And yeah,
Awesome.
really excited.
Yeah, guys,
Yeah.
go check out the book. I am excited to read it. StephAndrews.com. Um, I love you. I see you. Be careful. Search it
Yes.
on Amazon. She'll follow you on social media or
Yeah.
yeah, any Steph Andrews, or is it?
It's Steph Andrews.
It's Steph Andrews. Got it.
Yes, I've discovered that there are like several other composers also named Steph Andrews,
That's odd because
Stephanie
it's
Andrews.
such a weird name.
It is. It's
Yeah,
very unusual.
very unusual.
Yes.
All right. Well, Steph, thank you so much for coming on,
Yeah.
for sharing your heart with us. I'm excited about the book. Yeah, go
Yeah.
read it,
Thank you
y'all.
so much for having me. Talk
Absolutely.
on idolatry. What more could
Yes.
we want?
Come on, it's a party.